A reminder that you can support Unfound at patreon.com/Unfound Podcast, and you get some cool stuff there too. Christopher Joseph McNeil was a 19-year-old from Hayfork, California. He was an easygoing guy who liked to go to his sister's sporting events. On July 9th, 2009, Christopher didn't show up for a court date in Weaverille. Only then did his family and friends realize Christopher might have been missing for quite a while. He was never seen again. I'm Ed Densel, and this is Unfound. What is a phrase I think I was the first to coin in the true crime community? I'm in the information business, not the legal business or even the justice business. I'm looking for people who have stuff to say, who want to talk to me about what they have to say, and I know that these people are telling the truth. The problem, of course, is not every disappearance can be like Brianna Maitland, Julie Weflin, or Tom Brown, where you can start to feel like you're drowning in information. It's like trying to pick between 10 different kinds of ranch dressing. I mean, really, how does one logically do that? Yet, from our experiences with Dow Phillips, Randy Duran, and Melissa Hasley, to name just a few, we know there are tens of thousands of cases where a 4-sentence paragraph on the Charley Project is all there is to say. Very sad. Well, today with Chris McNeil, that's what we have. But what's worse is what has been public is wrong. What do we do with false few facts? And now a summary of the case. Christopher McNeil seemingly had the kind of childhood and teenage years that you would expect growing up in a very small town in Northern California. Not a lot to do. Some mischief, but nothing dangerous. Some laws broken, but nothing violent. Christopher had no addictions or mental health issues. In fact, Christopher was conscientious enough to be the only person in his family to attend his sister's high school softball games. But, like many teens, Christopher was having relationship problems and was in the process of a breakup when he went missing. So, on July 9th, 2009, due to a convenience store break-in committed by Chris and others, he had a court date. His lawyer called his family to say Chris never showed up in Weaverille for the appointment. This was a surprise to some of them since they didn't even know Christopher had gotten into trouble. The family contacted Chris's friends, and none of them had seen him either. He was never seen again. Only when the disappearance news spread to everyone who knew Chris did multiple stories about the last sighting of him come to light. Yet, they seem to contradict each other, with some going as far back as late June. Christopher's case has some of the most scant and inaccurate information that we've ever encountered in the 8 years of Unfound's existence. Contemplate how this could have happened while you also try to answer these 3 questions during the interview. Number 1, is it a coincidence that Christopher went missing while moving off of his girlfriend's parents' property? Number 2, surely Christopher didn't run off due to the charges awaiting him in court on July 9th, right? And number 3, how ominous is it that one of the last sightings of Chris could be that he was in a vehicle with his ex's new boyfriend? Christopher's family isn't sure what to think about what happened to him. The guest for this episode is Christopher's sister, Elizabeth. Unfound news. I need to give a shout out to my assistant, Eric, who has been doing some unfound work over the last couple of weeks due to him having a little more free time than usual. I think all of you will hear about the results of his work over the upcoming months. Next, I will be making another appearance over Zoom at Texas A&M University in October. I will be discussing the profession of podcasting, the role of podcasting in 21st century media, and how to go about creating a popular and ethical podcast. Finally, you can now find a show about the disappearance and murder of Andrea Bowman on Netflix. It's called Into the Fire. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound the sister of Christopher McNeil, Elizabeth. Elizabeth, welcome to Unfound.
Hi.
Thank you for joining the podcast tonight. By the way, for everybody listening, we are doing this interview on September 10th of 2024. Let's start here, Elizabeth. Let's just talk in general about your family. How many kids? Did you all grow up in Hayfork? Was it somewhere else? What can you say about all that?
I am the fourth. We have 5 altogether. Chris would be the third.
Okay.
And we did grow up in Hayfork majority of our childhood. But we lived in Humboldt County for a while and also in Shasta County for a while.
Okay, so we're talking Northern California area, and we've been to that area of California before. I guess, I think even in our prior conversation, we even talked about how that area of California has a, reputation.
Yes.
Right? There was even a show or podcast series called Mystery on Murder Mountain or something like that, and that is up in that area of California.
Yes.
Right. Okay. I have to ask, growing up in that area of California, are you, as locals, aware of that reputation that maybe other people in the rest of the United States have, or what? Aware of that as you were growing up?
For me, no. But from what my mom said, yeah, it is known.
Okay. All right. Very good. So you have 5 kids. You're fourth. Chris was just ahead of you. And how many years separate you two in age?
3 years.
3 years. So pretty close. Pretty
Yeah.
close. And what?
We didn't grow up close, but
okay.
Yeah.
All right. Close in age, but maybe not as close. Maybe hanging out and things like that. Is that what you mean?
Not until I got older.
Right. Because we're going to talk about here in a bit. You told me that, Chris, you must have been into sports, maybe in junior high school or high school or something, and he used to come to some of your events and everything, correct?
Yeah.
Okay,
yes.
we'll get to that for sure. Maybe just describe, outside of the reputation that this area of California has, maybe talk a little bit about Hayfork and these other places you live. Small little towns, middle-sized towns, what you could say.
Hayfork is a very small town, especially when we were growing up. It was about, I think our population was 1,800, maybe even smaller at the time.
Wow, yeah.
So very, very small, close-knit. Everybody knows everybody. A lot of people are related. We used to have a lot of family that lived there. Mm-hmm. In Redding, which is in Shasta County, it's one of the bigger cities.
Okay.
And then we lived there for about 5 years, and then we moved back to Hayfork. Before that, when we were really little, we lived in Humboldt County for a while.
Okay.
Which was also another small town, one of the small towns in Humboldt County.
Okay, very good. How did you and the rest of the kids, and Chris, of course, including, handle these all this moving around?
It wasn't. I mean, I didn't find it an issue, but I was also a lot smaller.
Yeah.
Because when we lived, I was born in Weaverille, which is outside of Hayfork.
Okay.
and so was Chris, and I think one of our other brothers was. And so I lived there till, I was like 3, and then we moved to Humboldt County for a few years, and then we moved to Reading for a few years.
Okay.
And then we moved back to Hayfork until Chris was an adult, basically.
Okay. All right, and maybe just overall, your family, all these kids and everything, kind of a strong silent type of family, or a little more outgoing? How would you just describe your family as a whole, including your siblings?
I think it depends on the person.
It does.
In my opinion.
Okay.
Like I'm more of the shy type until you get to know me, and then I'm more of the outgoing. Mm-hmm. And then I feel like that's a lot of my family members. And then if you go into the older generation, it's more of just tight-lipped, I guess you would say.
Okay. All right, strong silent type has been said sometimes. Okay. All right, thank you for that. And one more thing, just regarding your siblings, just the age spread from oldest to youngest. How many years from the oldest to youngest, if you can do the math?
So we have a half sister who's the 5th one.
Okay.
But if you do the whole siblings, so it'd be Jared, Mike, Chris, me. Mm-hmm. Jared and I are, I believe, 6 or 7 years apart.
Okay. And
then Jared and then our half sister Jessica that we grew up with. She grew up with us. So she's pretty much like a whole sibling.
Okay.
She just turned 24, and Jared is 37.
All right, so 13 years difference.
Yeah.
Pretty long. Of course, listeners should know right before we started this interview, I was telling you how my siblings are like 20 years older than I am, so that's a much larger spread. But 13 years is...
When you said that, though, I was like, oh, well.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, very good. All right, let's move on to this. So, of course, we're here to talk about Chris and his disappearance. What are some of the things that come to mind about Chris when you think about him now, like his personality, interests, childhood, things like that? What do you think of?
Personality-wise, he was pretty easygoing, quiet, a practical joker for sure. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I don't know. Overall, I would say he was just more of like a chill person. Just kind of like went with the flow for the most part. Until you made him mad, obviously, but it was he was pretty chill. Interests, he loved outside, anything outdoors. He liked baseball, football. He was very mechanically inclined. Mm-hmm. He liked adrenaline, anything like adrenaline hobbies. Gardening, hunting and fishing for sure.
Okay.
Like he was really outdoorsy.
Yeah, you told me that he liked to be out in nature, maybe would go out into the woods camping and things. And we have to remember, just 19 years old when he went missing. So, formative years. But you did tell me, he liked nature and things. And of course, he's just 3 years older than you are. What kind of relationship did he have with your other siblings? It sounded to me like there were like 3 boys and then you and your half sister. Huh?
The boys were wild.
Were they? Okay.
They not bad, just they were boys.
Okay.
For the most part, I would have to say they were all pretty close, really, but they would butt heads quite a bit, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Now, I just mentioned it before, but I think this is very important in understanding the relationship that you had with him. But when you got older, I guess you were into some sort of activities, sports or something, and you said that Chris would actually come to these.
Yeah.
And what did maybe talk a little bit about that?
So I played sports a lot. He played sports, but obviously he was out of high school at that point. Mm-hmm. So where he lived, it was right next to where I played baseball, which was right by the high school, or softball I played.
Okay.
So he would just walk over and come to the practices and the games, which especially the home games in general. So yeah, he would just come over and watch and hang out and stuff. So it was pretty cool.
Okay. Did you have any? Was that unique among your family members? Were other family members there, or just him?
Just him. Well, and our mom worked, so she didn't have time.
Okay.
And
that
then
happens. Sure.
Yeah. And then our little sister, she was little. I think she was 9 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Not even 9. And then our older brothers didn't live in town, so.
Okay, so at least you had one family member cheering you on.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. I realize a lot of siblings don't show up for those things. They're just doing. They have their own things to do, even if you're close in age. And I think that's pretty special that he would come see his sister play whatever's going on, softball.
Yeah, it was pretty cool too because that year we won championship.
Wow.
So it was pretty cool that he was there for that, and he was at that game. So it was pretty cool.
That is neat. All right, fantastic. Okay. Now, what about work? Maybe you should stick with this. School, high school. Did he graduate? What?
He did.
He did. Okay.
He did graduate.
Okay. What
he
kind of?
Graduated.
Please.
In 2008.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And what kind of student was he? Do you even know?
When when he would put the effort into it, he was good.
Okay.
But let's just say he didn't get A+.
All right, we'll just leave it at that. Okay, I got you. All right, but he did graduate, and you should know, Elizabeth. We talk a lot about a lot of missing people here on Unfound who haven't graduated high school, and so that's like something I always feel compelled to ask.
Out of all of it's for him, it was a really big deal for him to graduate because our biological dad didn't graduate from what I know of. And then none of our brothers graduated. And so he was honestly the first one to graduate out of the siblings. And then our oldest brother, he did graduate later on, but he was the first one out of all the siblings to graduate. So it was kind of a big deal.
Okay, gotcha. All right, so Chris graduated in 2008. So the year before he went missing. Okay. What did he do for money, for work? He said he was like mechanically inclined. What did he do in whatever area you were living at the time, whether it was Hayfork or Reading? Those late teen years, 16, 17, 18, 19. Did he have any part-time jobs, anything like that?
All I know is that he just did odd jobs, just what he could get. I know when we were growing up, he would do like clearing brush and stuff like that. So pretty much whatever he could find, really. Okay.
So like your average 18, 19-year-old.
Yeah, and I know when he was a senior, he did job shadowing for their senior projects, and there was a mill for a minute that was in Hayfork, and he shadowed there. But other than that, I don't know if he actually had like a real job.
Okay. What about his friends? You don't have to mention any names or anything. We're going to get into a couple names eventually, but just for friends, hang out with them. What kind of trouble did they get into? Any idea what would be a common kind of weekend for Chris and any guys or women that he was hanging out with? Any ideas?
An average weekend for him. Pretty much hanging out in his trailer.
Okay, so he had his own trailer. We're going to get into this, where he was living and everything. I think it's a very important part of this disappearance. But he had his own trailer, or what do you mean?
He was living in a, so he had a girlfriend, and he was living at her mom's property that she was renting at.
Okay.
And there was a trailer parked on the side of the house that was theirs that he was living in at the time.
Okay. So is this kind of like a what we would call a fifth wheel type of trailer, or
yeah, like a travel trailer.
Travel trailer. All right.
Yeah. And then he would usually hang out there, and friends would come over and hang out, or usually they would go out to like the woods and do parties, or just hang out, or he'd go to friends' houses.
Okay. All right, and we understand your 3 years difference. You have your own. This is something I say almost all the time in every interview. These guests have their own lives to live. You're not like you were stalking and following Chris around. you just picked up what you could. And we also have to remember this
Yeah.
was 15 years ago. Everybody has to understand that. So you were roughly, 16 then when he went missing? Roughly.
Yeah, I just turned 16.
Okay. Let's move on to some what we might call issues. Of course, we're going to get into how probably what we would say the most well-known story about Chris's disappearance is most likely not correct. We're going to get to that. But there is somewhere in this disappearance that Chris was having some legal issues. What do you know about that? We don't want to spend too much time on it, but I think it's relevant to our discussion tonight. Legal issues. Were you aware of these things that were going on? What can you say about them?
I knew a little bit about it, not a lot, like in depth. The only thing that I knew that was active at the time is that there was a case open about a theft, breaking and entering into one of the local stores.
Okay.
And from what I knew, there was a few people involved, including, and supposedly Chris was involved. But from the story I heard is he may or may not have been involved, and they were trying to blame him because of his background.
Okay. All right, very good. And do you know even approximately when that particular crime, if Chris was even involved, do you even have any idea when that occurred? Was that in 2009, 2008?
I'm pretty sure it was in 2009. I just don't know, months or days.
Okay. And to remind everybody, Chris, we're going to get into this date because it's once again something that I think we need to straighten out in this episode. He disappeared sometime during the summer of 2009, late summer. And you're thinking that this crime, if he was involved, happened well before this, but in 2009.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it happened in 2009.
Okay. Now, you did tell me a story, and it's just so unique that I have to ask you about it. There was a story you told me about a flatbed with a trailer. You're going to have to tell the listeners what
I
was
only
this
know some of it because my mom had told me the story, so I only know some of the story.
That's fine.
From what I know is it was someone that my grandparents knew, and Chris had taken the flatbed. I don't know why. I don't know his thinking process on it.
Huh.
And my grandma had seen it. He stuck it in my grandparents' backyard, behind a shed that they had. And I'm pretty sure it was my grandma, my mom said, had seen it, and she made him go return it, basically.
Okay. All right. So to your knowledge, though, there was no police involved in anything like this. There was no charges or anything like that.
Not that I know of.
Okay. So, and when we're thinking flatbed, we're not thinking like a flatbed 18-wheeler. Are we talking like a little flatbed trailer that would be pulled by a pickup truck or something?
Yeah.
Okay.
Nothing huge.
Okay, I got you, because I think a lot of people, when they hear flatbed, they automatically think 18-wheeler. That's not what we're talking about. And maybe I should ask you that. Being he's 19 years old, did he have his own car, truck? Did he have a vehicle that he drove around? What?
There was a vehicle that he drove around, but it was not his. It was this was back when I was still living there, so months before he had disappeared. His girlfriend or ex-girlfriend, her mom's car he used to drive, but it was only sometimes. It wasn't always.
Okay. So he didn't have his own vehicle, as a lot of 18, 19-year-olds don't. It's not unusual. So would he get rides for people, or would he do a lot of walking otherwise?
He would walk pretty much everywhere.
All right.
I mean, he would get rides, but majority of the time, he would walk.
Okay. And him walking could be a part of this disappearance, and we'll get to that. Going back to his legal issues, of course, we're going to eventually talk about this court date. It was supposed to happen in July. So when we get to that, is that, the best you can tell, does that have something to do with this theft, to your best of your knowledge? Or not?
Yeah.
It does?
It does.
Okay. All right, and we will come back to that soon. Let's move on to this. You've kind of already mentioned her. Her name is Sydney. Just in general, who is she? How did she and Chris know each other? boyfriend and girlfriend? What did you know at the time about the relationship?
So she went to school with all of us, or she showed up when I was my freshman year of high school.
Okay.
And she was the grade above me, I believe. I want to say.
Okay.
She was a troublemaker for sure in school.
Okay. You don't have to be specific, but your opinion of her, that we don't have to get into specifics, but your opinion in knowing her personally was that she was a troublemaker, your opinion.
Yes.
Okay. How did she and Chris, I guess at least at one point, they were a couple. How did that happen? Any insight into how that happened?
From what I know, they were on again, off again for quite a while. So she had got pregnant, and people were trying to figure out if it was Chris's or someone else's, and nobody really knew. And then so they like broke up and then got back together, and it was a hot mess, in my opinion.
Okay, and we're talking young people. We're talking, so she's only a year older than you, so she's like 17 or something.
Exactly.
16, 17 years old, and Chris is like 2 years older than she is.
Yeah, and then I think she had already had the baby before Chris had gone missing, I believe.
Okay.
I didn't really hang out with her and Chris, because I just personally didn't like her, so me and Chris usually hung out not with her.
Okay, gotcha. Once again, we realize that you have your own life to live, and we're just doing the best we can, of course, understanding that this is 15 years ago, but you have your own friends and other things going on, and you would just happen to run into Chris once in a while. But your impression of Sydney, not very positive, but somehow she and Chris ended up being a couple. And can you remember how it came to be that he ended up living in the trailer at her family's place?
I think it was, I think he was 18, and he graduated, and he just wanted to move out. I honestly think that's what it was. Okay. I'm not 100% positive.
Okay. All right, so it's very possible, the best we can tell in the timeline is that if graduation, let's just say it's in June of 2008, he moves into that trailer that's on that property, and he lived there from then till about the time he just... Please.
I wouldn't say it was right after graduation, but it was like a couple months or so after he graduated, I believe.
Okay. And was that his primary residence until he went missing?
No. Well, yeah, so from what my mom told me, is that he was not happy there at Sydney's, and then he was in the process of moving all of his personal things to my grandparents' house.
Wow.
And had all of his by the time he went missing, all of his stuff had been moved to my grandparents' house.
All right, and so he was in the process. What you're saying is he was in the process of moving when he went missing. That's the way you remember it. Okay, very good.
Yes.
So he goes over there, and of course, he's in the relationship with Sydney, and so it's very convenient. He's living over there at the trailer. She's over there. Maybe that all worked out, and you didn't have a very good impression of Sydney, but overall, if anything that you observed between the two of them, what kind of relationship did they have?
Odd.
Okay.
It wasn't great. I would say more toxic than anything.
Okay. And remember, this is 15 years ago. Of course, you're a grown woman now. I understand you're a mother as well. We talked a little bit about this before we started. You have a lot of great things going on in your life. Looking back at it as a mature woman now, looking back at it, you would say it was toxic.
Very.
Okay. Very good. All right, so we move in. I just want to cover this one more time. Chris's living situation, because I think this is very important to understanding this disappearance. So he's living in this trailer. It's over there. He goes to move in there. maybe has moved out. They're having kind of on again, off again relationship. But at some point, your understanding is somewhere in like the summer of 2009, Chris finally said, you know what, I'm getting the heck out of here. Started moving his clothes and stuff out of there.
It was in June.
June.
June of 2009.
Okay.
That's when he started moving into my grandparents' house because they had broke up.
Yeah.
And then he was moving in with my grandparents.
Okay, very good. All right, let's move on to this. We're just going to talk about two people in very general terms. We don't have to get into last names or anything, but we will be using real first names. Just in general, who is Brian?
He was one of Chris's childhood friends.
Okay. Did you know him very well?
Not really.
Not really. Okay. Do you ever remember him coming over to your house? Like
Chris would go to his. So when we were growing up, we lived down the street from him, basically. Mm-hmm. So Chris would go to his house a lot.
Okay. And before this disappearance happened, what would you say would be the general consensus of your family's attitude toward Brian? Good guy, bad guy, somewhere in between? What would you say?
Good.
Good guy?
Yeah.
Okay. And we'll come back to Brian a little later. Next, Frederick. Had you ever heard of him before Brian went missing? What can you say about him?
So Frederick was also a grade above me in school.
Okay.
So yes, I knew him.
All right. And your impression of him?
Not good.
Not good. Bad reputation.
Yes.
Okay. And was Chris friends with him? Or not?
When we were younger, yes, but when we got older, no.
Okay.
They were more of just acquaintances, in my opinion.
Okay. And the best you can tell, would you say that Chris was closer to Brian or Frederick? Brian. Okay. All right, and we're going to come back because Frederick's, we're not sure of, and we should just state for the record that Frederick is deceased now, so we may use his last name later, being that he's now deceased. Okay. So we move, just thinking about the year 2009, of course, we've already mentioned a big part of what was going on in 2009. It seems that Sydney and Chris's relationship had come to an end. He's moving out in June. As best as you can tell, when you look back at it, maybe your other siblings, you look back at 2009, what kind of year was the first half of 2009 for Chris? Things going well, things going not so well, the way you remember it. Anything unusual? What was going on with him?
I wouldn't say anything unusual, in my opinion.
Maybe anything that maybe at the time didn't seem like a big deal, but then after he goes missing, it's like, well, maybe I should have paid more attention to that. Anything like that. Or on the other hand, did really 2009 seem like any other year for Chris?
It was just any other year other than like he was an adult now. I mean, that would pretty much be the only thing that would be different than, because like he pretty much did the exact same thing other than he was living at his girlfriend's house and it wasn't great. And then
okay.
Chris wasn't a very open person.
Yeah, okay. And he has no responsibility to tell you. I mean, he's 18, 19 years old. He's an adult. He has no responsibility to tell you, your brothers, or your half-sister, or your parents, anything.
He's one of those people, like, everyone always would say, oh, he's a mama's boy. Yes, to an extent. But he would not, he's one of those people that could not call for 2 weeks, and it would be normal. Okay. So it's not like... That's why I'm like, I wouldn't say it was unusual for Chris, because he's one of those, he would just disappear for a little bit and then he'd come back, kind of thing.
But he actually wasn't missing, he was just off doing his own thing.
Exactly.
No real reason to check in with anybody. He's maintaining his life. except maybe for this theft. He's somewhat staying out of trouble. He has a place to live over in this trailer at Sydney's place. You know, what's there to do? Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I feel like a lot of us in our family are like that. Like, we'll go weeks at a time not talking to each other, and then all of a sudden we'll call or text, and it'll be like no time has gone by.
Okay. So 2009, once again, the way you think about it 15 years later is it's just kind of another year. Nothing escalating. No, you've ever heard any, having any beefs with anybody, anything like that. Just another year.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, a question I always have to ask, pretty much in these kinds of situations, Chris, have any problems with alcohol, with drugs, ever any mental health issues, any of that you know about?
As a 19-year-old, he would drink, yes.
Okay.
And he was a stoner. Like, that was pretty much Chris's go-to thing, was he would
Marijuana.
just smoke weed.
Okay.
That was his thing. Mental issues, none that I knew of, none that I asked my mom, and she's like, nope.
Okay.
So, pretty much just a stoner.
Right, and of course it is Northern California.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, and once again, the reputation that I think it has grown over the years. Okay, let's move on to this. You told me that you still remember the last time you spoke to him, and you I have to admit that you left me the impression that it sticks out for more than just the reason that it was the last conversation, but it was kind of the way he ended it with, talk to you later, love you. What can you say about that conversation? When was that? When did you have that conversation?
That was late June. I don't know the day exactly.
Yeah, that's all right.
It was late June. And he called to talk to Mom, or Mom called him. I don't remember who called who. Okay. But she was talking to him, and then we were supposed to go, because I was living in Humboldt at the time. We had moved after school ended. And so we were supposed to go up there and visit. And it was just odd because I talked to him, and he's like, hey, are you still coming up? And I was like, hopefully that's the plan. And he's like, okay, I'll talk to you later. Love you, sis. And we're not those type of people that say love you that often, especially Christopher and I. So it just kind of stuck in my brain, and I just thought it was odd. So I guess that would be the odd thing, but at that time thought it was odd, but nothing to be like, oh, what's going on?
Okay. But the way you remember it, though, then after he went missing, it kind of made that comment even odder? Okay. All right. Do you, this call, was it for any particular reason? What was the content, do you even know, of this conversation? Do you even remember?
I'm pretty sure Mom called. I guess it was probably Mom that called him. Okay. One of them called each other, and it was to make sure that we were coming up to visit. I'm pretty sure that's what it was.
Okay.
And I think they were just going over like the logistics of it. I'm not sure, because I just had walked in and was like, "Hey."
Okay. Now, I have to ask? Did this visit ever happen, or did he go missing first?
It, I think, ended up getting canceled, and then we had found out that he went missing a little while after.
Okay. Okay, do you happen to know, for example, once again, I realize you have your own life. Do you know the last time your mother, for example, actually saw Chris in person?
She said it was in June. After we had moved. She had gone back over to Hayfork, and she had saw him and picked him up. And I don't remember of what they did exactly, but I know she had picked him up, and she went and like took him places and stuff in town. But other than that was in June, so that was like mid-June maybe. Okay. So just a couple weeks before he had gone missing.
All right. And Chris had a cell phone of some type.
Yeah, he had a pay-as-you-go. I'm pretty sure is what it was.
Okay. All right. So there you go. We have this conversation late June that you had with him last time you spoke to him, and we will come back to that a little later. Now, this court date, the way you remember it, was your family aware that he had this court date that was supposed to be happening in July or not? Or is that not something you found out until after he went missing?
I did not know, but my mom knew.
She knew. Okay. All right, and we have to make clear that this court date was going to be in a town that you've already mentioned of Weaverille.
Mm-hmm.
This was not going to be like in Hayfork, and it wasn't going to be, or was it going to be where you lived, or you lived with your other siblings, other family members, or not?
We lived in Humboldt County at the time, me and my mom.
Okay, you and your mom.
And Chris lived in Hayfork, and the court date was going to be in Weaverille.
Weaverille. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so your mom knew about it, you didn't know about it. I don't think anybody may be surprised that the sister might not know about something like this, but being that your mother knew about it, this is not something then, for example, Chris was keeping a secret.
No.
Okay. And your mother knowing about this as best as you can tell, did she have any idea how Chris planned to get to this court date?
No.
All right. Very well could be that...
I think the only reason she knew is because he told her that he had a court date.
Yeah.
Other than that, no.
Okay. And once again, this is seemingly for this theft that involved him and other people, possibly including Frederick?
Yes.
Okay, but not Brian?
Not that I knew.
Not that I know of. Not that you know of. Do you believe that any other people could have been involved in what was going on in this alleged crime? Any other people besides the Chris and Frederick who might have been involved?
Probably, but I don't know who.
Okay. All right. And do you have any idea how they even got caught? Any?
There was cameras.
Oh, there were. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And
but I don't know if they identified them. I just knew there was cameras.
Okay. And to your knowledge, did the police come and handcuff him or take him to jail and he got out and bailed? Do you know how specific do you know about any of this?
I don't. Chris never went to jail for it, so I don't know if anyone else did.
Okay. So we got this. Allegedly, where was this crime committed? What was the theft of? Breaking into where?
The dairy. It's a family little convenience store.
Okay, like breaking into a convenience store when it's closed.
Yeah.
Okay, not that unusual of a crime. Okay. All right, so we have that. To your knowledge, any other issues that, of course, we already talked about this flatbed thing, but didn't end up, I guess, technically being a crime. Any other crime issues that you can think of that Chris was involved in before this convenience store? Anything?
Years before, but other than that, no.
Okay. All right, so we have this court date, and what was the court date supposed to be?
The date?
Yeah. July something?
My mom said it was late June, in between late June. Hold on.
Go ahead. Take your time.
Yeah, she said it was between late June and July 9th.
Okay. All right, so we're not sure then, and once again, this might be something. Have you ever tried to go into court records?
I have to go in person, I believe, and that's
probably
like an hour and a half away.
Right. And then we've already been through.
And I work full time.
Yeah, right. We've been through all the things you have going on in your life. Yeah, I got you. Very good. All right, so it's at least possible. I just want you to know someday, or you get somebody to do it. I don't think it could be done online. That probably those records still could be gotten, of course, and as this continues. If Chris is not found tomorrow, whether alive or deceased, probably those records will be there for you to find, or somebody to find.
Yeah.
When the time comes. Now, let's move on to this. The last sighting. First of all, we have to fix this. Of course, in most places, the date, the last sighting, what we would call the disappearance date, is June 15th of 2009. You are very convinced that is not the correct date.
It's not.
Okay. Do you have any idea where that date came from, how it originated?
I was told that it was from my brother Michael, that was the date.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was always, when I was younger, when he first had disappeared,
Mm-hmm.
I was always told it was the end of June, like around like June 25th-ish.
Mm-hmm.
So when I heard June 15th, I'm like, well, that's weird because that's not what I heard. So there's been numerous dates
Right.
of when Chris was supposedly last seen or whatever you may have, but I was always told it was late June.
Okay. Let me ask you this, and I realize you don't think very highly of Sydney, and we'll get into more of that later, but somebody who might have been seeing Chris a lot more regularly than you, your mother, other people, what date do they attach to his disappearance?
Nobody has ever told me.
For example, Sydney, being that they were in a relationship, even though it seems that was ending, has she ever over the years stated, the last date I saw Chris was?
She won't.
She won't talk about it?
Nope.
Okay. All right, we will come back to that. So that's kind of giving a little bit of a foreshadowing of later. All right, so we have a date problem with this. We're not specific of the last date that Chris was, let's just say, in public, where people who knew him could see him and talk to him. Let's move on to this. Even the story, though, and the public story is that he and a friend were walking seemingly to Weaverille or somewhere, and the friend came back, and Chris did not. You don't believe that story is correct either?
No.
All right. Why? Please explain that, please.
Okay. So my mom the investigators had called my mom, or not the investigators, sorry. Chris's attorney had called my mom to tell him that he had missed his court date. So then my mom had called my grandparents, seeing how he was going to be moving in with my grandparents, had called my grandparents to let them know that Chris had missed his court date. So my grandma was like, oh, well, she's like, we had seen him. This was like days later, obviously, that he had already missed his court date.
Okay.
And my grandma's like, oh, well, we saw him walking outside of town when we were taking your father, my grandfather, to his cancer treatment.
Huh.
And Grandma just had never thought anything of it because Chris walked everywhere, and she didn't know that he had a court date that day. So that was the last that we know of, the last person to have seen Christopher before he had gone missing.
But your grandparents could not put a firm date on that?
I've never, seeing how that's it's news to me as of a couple of weeks ago.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because the story I always heard was that Chris was heading out of town in a truck with Brian. That's the one I always heard. Not the walking out of town with a friend. Okay,
very good. Where did that story originate, that he and Brian were in a truck riding out of town? Do you know where, being that was the one that went on for years, do you know where that one came from?
I had heard that from one of our brothers, and then also a few of people from town. And then even my boyfriend now said that that's the story he heard. And he graduated with Chris.
Okay, and of course Brian, we've already spoken about him. And he was a friend, and allegedly this is the story that you heard all these years. And just recently now, though, that story might be in a bit of a big question, whether it's true or not. And of course, the way we do things here at Unfound, we try to present these things as honestly as possible, and we let the listeners try to sort through this as best as they can. So we have one story that went on for several years. We have another story that's on a site such like the Charley Project. And then we have the story that your grandparents tell about seeing him walking along the road. Okay. Yeah. All right. Now I have to ask you something. And of course, I asked you this before, but I want to put this on the record as well. Is there any reason that your grandparents, being that they saw their grandson walking along the side of the road, didn't stop? Say, hey, Sonny, where are you going?
They probably waved. Okay. Knowing my grandparents, they probably waved. But it's not an unusual sighting to see Chris walking down the street. So they
Okay.
probably never thought anything of it. And the fact that my grandpa had his cancer treatment appointment that day, and at that point was a 2-hour drive.
Wow.
They probably weren't going to stop and be like, hey, let's talk. They were probably more of, gotta go.
All right. Very good. That's a pretty good explanation. All right. But I also have to ask, once again, as best as you can tell, being that he was going to be moving in with them and had been moving stuff over there, were they not worried that he didn't show up for like 3 or 4 days, being that he had all his stuff there?
No, that's Chris.
That's Chris. Okay. All right.
That's just who he is.
Okay.
Like, yeah.
All right. You know him. I don't know him. Most of the listeners don't know him. So we just have to go by what people who knew him or know him say. And that's what you're saying. All right. So just to go over this again, the date that you're going to find anywhere is probably not correct. The story that you're going to read, even on a very reputable place like the Charley Project, is probably most likely not correct. No. And we have people like the grandparents who surely have no reason to lie, who saw him and say that he was walking out of town, and would be inclined maybe to believe them, but the problem is that doesn't necessarily rule out maybe some of these other stories. So this is all a big, vague, a bunch of vagueness going on here, right, Elizabeth? Very much.
Very much.
Okay. All we know is Chris went missing during the summer of 2009 somewhere for some reason. Okay. Let's move on to this. So what was the first, as best as you can tell, what was the first red flag? Somebody said, you know what, something's not right here. People finally noticed that Chris wasn't around, or what?
When mom got the call from the attorney that he had missed court, nobody really thought anything of it. Mm-hmm. But then a couple of days later, mom hadn't heard from Chris. So then we started calling, I called some of our mutual friends to see if they had seen from him or heard from him. And they hadn't. And I was like, okay, well, that's weird. And especially since, Chris is always walking around town or out and about. So for someone not to see him, a little odd. And then, what was it? I think mom said it was a couple weeks after that. It was almost August, or it was August. Okay. She said that she was at work and some cops, I don't know if it was cop sheriffs, or I'm not sure, came to her work all the way from Trinity County to Humboldt to ask her questions because they thought that she was hiding Chris out in Humboldt County. Wow. All over this whole breaking and entering thing. Mm-hmm. And she's like, I don't have him. Yeah. I don't know where he is. We've actually been looking for him. Come to find out that they were looking for him in Trinity County, and he even had talked to Sydney and her mom, and were following leads on that. Wow. And found nothing. And so my mom, that's when the missing persons and everything started, was that day. So that was in August.
So I guess we have a very odd situation here where the police started looking for Chris before his family did. Because the police realized that something was going on, but your family didn't.
Well, they thought that it wasn't that they thought that something was going on. They thought we were hiding Chris out when we weren't. Yeah. So. Okay. And then my mom, that's when my mom had started looking into it, and she's like, that's not anything that's correct. And so we started following the leads, and they told us the leads that they had looked, which some of the stories later on that we heard, and we're like, nope, we already looked through that. That's not true.
Okay. Do you remember, we don't want to make his name public, or her name. Do you know the name of Chris's lawyer?
I do not.
Okay. Wonder if that lawyer would still be alive. Maybe he might be able to also, once again, I'm not here to give other people work necessarily, but I'm sure there's paperwork that this lawyer still has. And that also might help you with your court date. And it also might the lawyer, even though it's been 15 years, maybe the lawyer might even have some insight into Chris's disappearance. Maybe.
Yeah.
Something just to put on your list of things to do. I know you're a very busy woman. Just something, but it is a lawyer, and lawyers do this stuff. All right. So this is how this all got started. Police show up. They think actually that your family's what we might say, harboring or hiding Chris from the law.
Yeah.
And certainly families do that. That is not an unusual thought. And I necessarily can't blame the police maybe for thinking that. Now, I do have to ask you. Go ahead, please.
The thing that I thought the only thing that I thought was weird when I heard that is that it was over something so small. It's like, why are you going all the way to a different county to find someone over something so small? That part I thought was a little odd.
You may be right. The issue, though, is that we don't exactly know the nature of this theft. We don't know what was stolen. We don't know how, we don't, right? We don't know what was stolen. We don't know the dollar amount. Nothing, right?
True.
All right, so that might have something to do with it. And if you had we had some really precise information on that, maybe that would make their actions make more sense. It's just hard to tell. And of course, there might be more to the story that they're not saying, which is always, they don't have to say it. Now, let's make something clear, though. Your opinion. What are the odds that Chris would try to walk from Hayfork to Weaverille for a court date?
Not that hard, because you can get a ride at that time, back then, you could get a ride pretty easily.
Okay.
And someone would probably stop and pick you up that you knew.
Okay. But just what we would say, just a straight out, I'm deciding to walk. Probably not. He would be walking
just a straight walk there? No.
Yeah, right. He's walking, but he's hoping he's going to get picked up by somebody.
Exactly.
Okay. Very good. All right, so let's move on to this. So we now move to what we would say, the rest of the disappearance. So the police have this report. Who ended up filing it? Your mother?
Yeah.
Okay. And when did that happen? I guess sometime in August of 2009?
Yeah.
Okay. Were any searches done at the time? Have any searches been done since then?
So when we would get leads, like there was one that supposedly happened where Chris was driven and taken and was running and supposedly got shot, and then they was buried. The cops had investigated it. They found nothing. Okay. So there have been searches, and every time they would get something, they would check, and they found nothing every single time.
Okay. Were any of those searches, once again, you know the area, I do not, most of the listeners do not. Would you say any of those areas are along the road or anything like that between Hayfork and Weaverille or not?
I don't know about along the road.
Oh. Along the road, just in the general direction of going to Weaverille.
Not that I know of.
Not that you know of. Okay.
I just know that my mom would get leads, or like the cops would get leads, they would look into it and they would find nothing.
Okay. All right. So a lot of rumors out there. We don't, and for purposes of interviews, we really, really try to stay away from them unless there's something in particular, something that might have an anchor in some sort of truth. So we just try to, we hear so many rumors in doing disappearances. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you happen to know if the police spoke to Brian? Did the police speak to Frederick? Did the police speak to Sydney? Do you know any of the people that they, went and talked to? Hey, Chris is missing. Can you help us with this?
They had gone and talked to Sydney's mom, and I believe Sydney too.
Okay.
They looked into the leads that supposedly they said, or I'm pretty sure Amy, Sydney's mom, and Sydney had no leads, basically, from what I know.
No help.
And no help. And
Okay.
then I know, or I've been told that they had talked to Brian and supposedly had done a lie detector test and he had passed. But I'm not positive on that because I've never seen any documents or been told, and I don't also necessarily believe a lie detector test.
Okay, polygraphs cannot be believed. All right, so it sounds to me like police did what they could, and we're going to come back to some of those people mentioned here in a bit. So they were talking to people who knew Chris, asking if they'd seen him, anything suspicious. Maybe they might even thought maybe some of these people were harboring him and hiding him.
Yeah,
possibly.
I'm pretty sure that's why they went and talked to Amy and Sydney.
Yeah.
But they had checked into everything, like I'm guessing, I don't know what friends of his they talked to, but from everything that I've been told, they looked into everything and found nothing.
Okay. So they're doing what they can, talking to people, and of course, Chris is still missing 15 years later. But like I said, we're going to come back to some of those people. Let's move on to this. Cell phone. Is his cell phone missing with him?
As far as I know.
All right. Besides Chris being missing, any of his possessions, like wallet, ID, things like that, those items are also missing?
The only thing that we know that he had on him was a wallet, and which would have his license and social security and stuff in it.
Okay. And his phone as well. His phone didn't pop up like at the trailer or your grandparents.
All of his possessions, like personal stuff, from what we know, was at our grandma's, our grandparents, and we didn't find a phone.
Okay. So, and being that it was one of those pay-as-you-go phones, no chance on pinging it or any records. And maybe I should ask you this regarding his phone. Have you ever been able, of course you spoke to him in late June. Have you ever been able to factually determine, either you or your mother, anybody working on this, who the last person was that he spoke to or texted on his phone?
No.
No one. No idea. Of course, there had to be somebody.
When I was asking my mom questions before doing all of this, I was asking her stuff just to see what I didn't know versus what she knew and vice versa. She said the last time she had talked to him on the phone was before 4th of July. Okay. But it wasn't in June. It was in July before 4th of July because she was at work and she talked to him on the phone.
Okay.
Other than that, I don't know who the last person was to talk to him or him to text or vice versa. I don't know.
Okay. All right, let's move on to this. Now, you said that he was driving, I guess, somebody else's car or something like that. But you had told me that the car disappeared and then reappeared, or what is that story, Elizabeth?
So, it's not factual. I don't know.
Go ahead. We talked about it, so I need to ask you about it. If it gets a little too out there, I can always edit this out. But it was something having to do with
the only thing I know is that there was a car. I remember it was a white car. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was white. I know that because I remember visually. He would drive it every now and then from what I know, it disappeared. And then all of a sudden, years later, it reappeared in Mad River, which is in the middle of nowhere, out Highway 36, going towards Humboldt.
Whose car was this?
Sydney's mother's, I believe.
Sydney's mother's car that he would usually drive. It seemingly, he went missing, and then it goes missing, and then years later, it's found in a river.
I don't know if it was, It was found in Mad River. It's a town.
Oh, it's a town. Okay, gotcha. Mad River is a town. Okay. It was found in Mad River. Have you ever gotten a full story about, was it stolen? Did they sell it?
Supposedly it was Sydney's dad had it or something. I don't know the whole story on it. I just know that supposedly someone had it and that it had nothing to do with Chris. And I was like, okay, well, that's just a little odd to me. Just seems odd. Okay. So just thought I'd point that out.
Okay. So we have this story about this car, and it appears years later. I don't know if it was abandoned. Maybe it broke down. You don't know.
No.
No. Okay. But to be clear, though, this was not Chris's car. This is a car that he just drove once in a while because he was in a relationship with Sydney.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And we don't know where that car is now, correct?
I have no idea.
No idea. All right. Let's talk a little bit more about Sydney. Now, is it true that she claimed that Chris raped her? Is that true?
Yeah.
It is. When did this come up? How did this come up? When did your family first hear about it? Before or after the disappearance?
She text messaged me on Facebook in, I want to say 2010.
Okay, so the next year.
I think it was like summer of 2010.
Okay.
And she was trying to be cordial with me. And I was just blunt about it. And I was like, how about you tell me what happened to my brother? And she's like, and then she just went off the handle and she was like, when they find your brother, he's going to go to prison for raping me and my sister. And I was like, because she's all along said that he was supposedly dead.
Okay.
And so I was like, and I said, well, that's odd for someone to go to prison if they're dead, Sydney. Mm-hmm. And then she never replied back.
Okay. Did you save that message being that it was made over Messenger?
Oh my gosh, I don't know.
Okay. Well, sometimes people screenshot these things. I mean, I've seen screenshots from 15 years ago. I have to ask.
Yeah. I don't even think I have the same Facebook anymore.
Okay.
But I don't.
Okay.
I had it for a long time.
Okay.
But I don't know if I still have it.
Okay. So is that, as best as you remember, is that the first time that you ever heard her claiming that Chris raped her and her sister?
Yeah, me personally, yes.
Yeah. And after you heard that, did you ever ask your brothers? Did you ever ask your mother about this? And what did they say?
We thought it was, all of us in the family thought it was odd because Chris wasn't a very sexually active person.
Okay.
I don't know how else to put it.
Okay.
He wasn't one to just go out and have sex with anyone. Like, he didn't even lose his virginity until I think he was like 17.
Okay.
And it just wasn't something that was a very out of character thing for her to say about Chris. Mm. Like, that's not something that he would. Okay. He literally told me one time that girls are too much trouble.
So well, I'm single at 54, so there you go.
It was just a very out of character thing to say, so I was just like, that's weird.
All right, so, but this is something that popped up like a year after he goes missing.
Yeah.
Okay, and there were
like it was weird. It was weird to me because she was like trying to be like best friend like when she messaged me, or just like really close friends, and I was like, not having that. Sorry, I'm gonna call you out.
Okay. All right, and we have to remember she and Chris were in a relationship together.
Yes.
At one point. And so maybe they were on the outs at the time that Chris went missing. But this whole thing about him raping her and her sister, just totally out of the blue.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on to this. Now, did she end up having a child at 17, 18?
Yeah, she had two.
She had two. Okay. Did she claim that one of them was Chris's child?
Yes.
And factually, do you know, like, I guess through DNA or something, was that child Chris's?
Through DNA, it is not Christopher's.
How did you find out about all this? Was she open to you about this? How did you find out that it's not
Through mutual friends.
Okay.
She had the baby in question was another one, someone that we all went to school with's kid.
Okay. And what was the status of her being pregnant or having any kids at the time of Chris's disappearance? Was she pregnant at that time or what?
I don't think she was pregnant, but I'm not 100% positive. Because I know she was in a relationship with Brian.
All right, and we're going to get to that. So what you're saying is she and Chris are a couple, and then after they are on the outs, she ended up dating Brian.
Yes.
Okay. And did this child end up being Brian's child?
The second one.
The second one.
Yeah.
But not the first one.
Not the first one.
Not the first one. Okay. But the way you remember it, she did claim that the first child was Chris's, even though we now believe that that's not true.
Yeah, I was in the trailer that Chris was staying in one night, and she came in and was basically saying it was Chris's. And I was like, I don't know about that.
Okay. Let's move on to this. Brian, we just spoke about him. You said that he and Chris grew up good friends. How did he react to all of this? Has he ever independently spoken to your family about Chris's disappearance?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. And so, the best you could tell, were Brian and Sydney in a relationship at the time of Chris's disappearance?
Yeah.
They were. And in fact, you already said that the second child she had was Brian's.
Yes.
All right, so I guess she must have gotten pregnant sometime after the disappearance.
I think so.
Okay. Did they stay a couple, or are they a couple here today in 2024? Not saying that
No.
you're stalking them and following them around or anything, but...
no, they're not.
No. Okay. All right. Any idea how long they were a couple after 2009 at all? Not even a guess.
Maybe a year. I don't know.
Okay. So we also have to then remember, it seems then the way the timeline works out, that when she and you had that messaging conversation in 2010, it's very possible it's at the same point that she was dating Brian. Maybe.
I don't.
Okay.
I don't know. She dated a lot of people, so I don't know.
Okay. All right. Moving on to this, and you've already stated it, but we'll make sure everybody understands. Brian they did offer to give Brian a polygraph test. To your knowledge, he passed it. He chose to take it. He doesn't have to. We have to remember there's no law saying anybody has to take a lie detector test. But he chose to, and he passed it.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know, even through the grapevine, has Brian ever offered up a theory as to what happened to Chris?
Not that I know of.
Okay. What about Sydney in that conversation when you had and she made the rape claim? Has she ever explicitly or through the grapevine, have you ever found out what she thinks happened to Chris?
Not what she thinks, no.
Okay.
The only thing that I've ever heard her say or heard is what she told me.
Okay. Let's move on to Frederick. I already stated that he is dead, so I guess we can use his full name. What is his full name?
It's Frederick Reeves. I don't know
Frederick
his middle name.
Reeves. Okay. And he is dead. He died just a couple years after. As best as we can tell, it does seem to be a little bit of a bizarre story regarding Frederick's death. What is the story of his death?
I honestly don't know. I just know what people told me because I was not living in the state or anything.
And so, what have you heard?
The only thing I heard is that he was found hung behind the swinging bridge or by the swinging bridge in Hayfork, dead. That's the only thing that I've heard.
Okay.
And then I've heard a few stories of people saying that there was stuff shoved down his throat, but I don't know if that's accurate or not.
Okay. Now, listeners should know that I looked into this myself, and I did find an obituary for Frederick. It's out there. The issue, though, and of course, as you can tell, Elizabeth is convinced that he died in the area of Hayfork. But I actually found an Arkansas address for Frederick for 2009, 2010, 2011. I did. And although sometimes these databases get things wrong, 99.9% of the time they're right. Have you ever heard anything that Frederick could have any connection to the state of Arkansas?
I just know that he was adopted, but I don't know anything other than that. And
Okay.
I know he has I don't know if they were married or not. I think she's married. I don't know.
I think he was married at the time of his death. He was.
Yeah,
That's
we
true.
went to school together.
That's true.
And she lives in Redding. So
Redding, California. Okay, Redding, California.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know about the whole Arkansas thing, and
Right.
I know that he was in Hayfork. So
okay, because you'll see the obituary. It does not explicitly say he died in California. All it does is say he's from Redding, and you read enough obituaries like I do that usually they state where a person has died. He died at home, he died in the hospital in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, or something like that. That is not contained in Frederick's obituary for some reason.
Oh, I don't know.
So it very well may be that he died in California, like you said, whether he died from hanging from a bridge or whatever. But I have to admit, there's a part of me that is wondering, did he actually die in the state of Arkansas? So I just leave that
the
up.
fact that locals found his body, I would say he
Yeah, I agree with you, but the problem we have is there is an air of sensationalism regarding his death. Hanging from a bridge, stuffed in his mouth, and I start to wonder, this sounds like the telephone game to me. So
and that's why I'm like, I don't know. I was living in North Dakota at the time. I didn't like the dude, so I didn't really know anything about him.
So we're just not sure about this. And the reason this is important is because Frederick was allegedly involved in this crime that involved Chris. And so I have to ask, is there any proof that you ever heard over the years that actually Frederick made it to the trial date or to the court date?
I have no idea.
No idea. Do you know if Frederick, in those 2 years after the disappearance, before he died, was ever asked about Chris's disappearance? Did he ever give any insight into what he thought might have happened?
Not that I know of. And the only thing I just thought was weird is that his adopted brother, who was much older, had some kind of beef with our brother or about Chris for some reason. I don't know why. I don't know.
And which brother do you mean of yours?
No. So Frederick's older brother.
Oh, Frederick's older brother had a beef with.
Had issues because we had actually got years and years later. Like I was already a mom and everything. We ended up somewhere. We were in a room together or whatever, and he ended up. He was talking about his brother Frederick, and I was like, I'm leaving. Because I didn't like Frederick, so I just left. And then I heard him bring up my brother, Chris, and I turned around and I was like, excuse me? And he, for some reason, he was just saying bad things about Chris. And I was like, why do you have an issue with my brother? And then he tried to say that Chris got his brother in trouble and he was innocent. And I was like, your brother was not innocent. Your brother was a kid that was in trouble all the time. So let's be honest here. Okay. So I don't know.
Okay. All right. Not sure what to think about Frederick and all of that, but it seems to be something that could be important in understanding Chris's disappearance. Maybe not, but it seems so.
See, and Frederick was a kid that was always in trouble.
Yeah. So
whatever may have happened to him could have been something that he did something wrong to someone.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Okay. Once again, I realize you're very, very busy. And one of these days, once again, probably the paperwork's going to be around for quite a while, so you have time. This is once again one of those things that I think, if Chris, of course, doesn't appear alive tomorrow, that probably should be on your list of things to do. To just make sure, this just sounds like small town rumorizing.
It is.
Go get you can get it. Get a death certificate for Frederick Reeves. Find out, is it in California? Is it in Arkansas? What was the cause of death? These things. I think this is all very much worth your time when you have the time. Okay? My opinion. Let's move on to this. Now, here's, we need to talk about Sydney's father. This, of course, we can't forget about this trailer. Her father died in that trailer. What exactly happened?
So I don't know if it was supposedly it was his trailer. Don't know for sure. Supposedly, or from what I was told, is that the trailer had caught engulfed in flames, and her father was inside of it. That's all I know.
Oh my! This happened like the
and
next
that was
year or
years
5
after Chris.
Very long time after.
Years after Chris disappeared. I don't know how many years, but I know years after Chris disappeared.
Okay. Let's move up to 2015. So now we're talking 6 years after Chris went missing. Somehow there were traffic citations against Chris. How did you find this out? When did you find this out? What are we talking about here?
When I started looking into Chris's case myself and trying to figure stuff out, because it just nothing made sense to me, any of it.
Of course. I agree.
So I was looking into it, and then I decided to get an investigator. So I was asking my brother Mike about it, and he recommended Trudy. So she's the one that started looking into it, took over Chris's page, and then she would also, because Mike lived here and I lived in California. Mike lived in California and I lived in North Dakota at the time.
Okay.
So I couldn't really do much other than look into things. And then I would be like, hey, Mike, will you check this out? So Mike would talk to Trudy more from what I know of. I think that's where the whole friend thing came, walking down the street and the date thing, the June 15th date.
Mm-hmm.
But Trudy asked if Chris had a driver's license, and I was like, yes. And she's like, is it valid? And I was like, when he went missing, yes. So she had pulled his DMV or like looked into it or something like that. And that's when she saw that there was 2 citations.
Wow.
In 14 and 15. And I'm like, that's weird. In Trinity County.
Wow.
And she said that they weren't exactly the same citations. One was more of like a jaywalking, necessarily like minor. Mm-hmm. And there was another one, I don't know exactly. And I was like, oh, okay. And that's as far as it went.
Now I have to ask you, are we sure that this is, of course, Chris McNeil, not the most common name in the United States, but of course there are a lot of Christophers out there, and there are a lot of McNeils out there. Was she sure she was talking about the same Christopher McNeil and it wasn't some other Christopher McNeil?
There's only one in Trinity County, so yeah.
Mm-hmm. So 6 years after his disappearance, somehow citations, traffic citations.
If his license got stolen, I don't know. I mean, he's not the most average looking guy, but not the most unique looking guy, but I don't know. So,
and when you say Trinity County, we have to remember, most of the people listening to this are not familiar with Northern California. When we're talking about Trinity County and Humboldt County and Weaverille and Redding and Hayfork, maybe you need to explain a little bit of that just to make sure we understand where these citations were.
So Trinity County has, or not Trinity County, sorry. Weaverille has about a little over 2,000 people in it. Mm-hmm. Hayfork has now, today, I think they hit 2,200 people. So they're not very big at all. Yeah. So Chris being the only Christopher McNeil there, it's not like it's a small town. It's a small county. Yeah. Everybody pretty much knows everybody.
I guess what I'm asking is, these citations, were they given to him in Hayfork or Redding?
Weaverille. I think she said Weaverille.
In Weaverille.
Yeah.
Wow.
And my thing is was he, one of the ones, was he pulled over supposedly? Because I heard that he could have been pulled over and like let go before anything popped up. I'm like, well, that's weird. Why would you let somebody go before the name popped up? Mm-hmm. So those 2 things, I was like, that's just really weird.
Was she ever able actually to get the real paperwork regarding that?
Not that I know of.
Because no matter if he was in a car, whether he made went through a red light or was doing 35 and a 25 or something, they would have to take down the kind of car. They would have to take the license plate number down and all of that. You didn't get that information at the time. Okay.
No.
This is probably, once again, something probably you need to look into further.
Yeah, I've been actually working on that.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, okay. So that is a pretty good, especially since it's 6 years after he went missing. I have to tell you, it seems unlikely that somebody would be using Christopher's ID 6 years after he went missing, because
it
by
would
that
be expired also.
Yeah, right. So I don't know.
That's another thing that I thought was odd. I'm like, you're just gonna let somebody go with an expired driver's license?
Right. All right. So for everybody out there, he goes missing in 2009 and 2015. For some reason, his name appeared on some traffic citations. For some reason. Now let's move on to this, and you'll have to tell the listeners what friend said this. At some point, Chris said to somebody, "What would it take to disappear?" Who said this?
Yeah.
Who did he say this to?
According to the friend, it was Lorenzo, and I don't know his last name, so I don't know.
Okay.
I just know his name's Lorenzo, and they were at his house, and they were just hanging out, and I guess he asked Chris asked him, like, hey, like, what does it take to just disappear? And he's like, oh, and I don't know exactly all it was said. I was just like, that's weird. Why would he just ask that? He's like, I don't know. He's like, I thought it was weird too. And I was like, okay. And I'm not the only person that he had told that to, because my brother, our oldest brother, had told me the same thing, that Lorenzo told him that too. And I was like, that's weird though.
So do you think this happened in, 2008?
I would say probably a couple months before he had disappeared.
Oh, so in 2009.
Yeah.
Huh. And this Lorenzo, would you say you have a positive attitude toward him? Do you think this is something he would make up, or what?
No, because he's one of those people that kind of just, he didn't want like a lot of attention on him kind of thing. So it's like, why would he say that if he doesn't want attention? And he was actually our oldest brother's best friend for a really long time until they just moved away.
Wow.
So I don't find it odd.
Okay.
I mean, I find what Chris said odd, or asked odd, but I don't find,
but you're not
I don't think it's odd for Lorenzo to say it.
You're not questioning his honesty.
Yeah.
Okay. Huh. Did this, so you didn't find this out until after Chris went missing?
Yeah, it was like a year, because I wasn't in town, like I didn't live there, so me talking to people, like friends and stuff, it was kind of like hard since I was in high school.
Yeah.
So when I ended up moving back over in the area, and everyone's like, yeah, and then they would start talking to me about it, and I was like, well, that's weird. So it was about a year, probably more, after Chris had disappeared.
All right. So Lorenzo and Chris, even though Lorenzo is best friends with your older brother, but he was still friends with Chris as well.
Yeah, he was closer to, at that time, he was closer to Chris.
Okay. So we have some curious things. We have a date problem. We have an actual circumstances problem. We have like 3 different stories about sightings that maybe they all kind of go together somehow, very possible. And then to add in on top of this, we have traffic citations with Chris's name on it from 2015. And then even before he goes missing, Chris is talking about somebody that the family trusts that, he's saying that Chris actually said, what would it take to disappear? And the listeners should know, and you should know as well, I think the listeners maybe know, you should know, Elizabeth, we have covered a few disappearances where that's exactly what people did. They walked off. And ended up being still alive.
To me, that wouldn't be crazy.
Okay.
Just knowing how my brother is, it wouldn't be crazy. And my thing is, until I have facts, it could be possible.
Okay. So let's move on to that. Of course, we talked about some things, maybe some things you're already doing, and maybe things that can be done in the future. How difficult has this been for your family over the past 15 years?
Pretty hard, really. My mom, she just doesn't really like to talk about it. Like she'll like if I ask her questions, she'll answer it, but she doesn't really like talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
We've had some family disagreements about things among siblings.
Yeah.
So it's taken the toll on a lot of us.
Right.
All of us.
Right. That's very common, Elizabeth. As I maybe stated more times than I ever had in the last 8 years, stated, a lot of times when the audience hears a guest, a sister or mother, whoever, on, usually that's the only person doing anything in that family on the disappearance. And I'm not saying that's the situation with your family, but that's very common. There's just one person who's trying to do this. Everybody else doesn't want to have anything to do with it. Or it's something like, family members want to do stuff, but they differ on what should be done. And so divisions,
See, and in ours, it's more of mom, she'll help to an extent, but you can tell it hurts her a lot.
Yeah.
So I try to keep her until I know the facts. I don't tell her, kind of thing. That way it doesn't kill her more, in a sense. And then our siblings, our little sister, like I don't even think she really necessarily remembers a lot about Chris, because when Chris went missing, was 8. And then our brothers, they have a lot of different things to say. So that's where I'm just like, okay, well, we need facts. Where are the facts?
Yeah.
You guys hear this, but where are the facts?
Right.
So it's trying to shuffle through all of that.
Right. And for you, as we talked about before this interview started, you have your own life to lead, and you got a lot of things going on.
Yeah.
All right. And somehow, even though I know Chris's disappearance is a priority for you, all those other things are more of a priority. You have a lot of responsibilities.
But he's always on my mind.
For sure. I understand.
Like all day today, I was like, oh, what about this? Oh, there's this. Oh, all at work. And everyone's like, are you okay? And I'm like, I'm fine.
Right. Yep. It's hard to find that kind of balance between all, right? Hard to find the balance. Right.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. I just want to go over one more thing regarding the actual circumstances and why they are so foggy. When did it become obvious to you that there was not a clear-cut story as to how Chris went missing and the actual date? For you personally, when did it become obvious to you?
That year he went missing. Because it was a lot of gray area.
Mm-hmm.
When I would ask like my brothers about it, because they were helping mom throughout it, because she was a wreck.
Yeah.
In a sense, like she wasn't crying all the time, like obviously, but she was like, you could tell that it was taking a toll on her. So I would ask a lot of the questions, and it was all gray. Yeah. And I'm like, that isn't why. So I don't know. I'm one of those. I like to look into this kind of stuff. So when it came to my family, I was like, oh boy, here we go.
Yeah.
So and then when I turned 18, I kind of dug into it more. And a lot of it, I'm like, Mom, this does not make sense. None of this makes sense. And then I would ask her, like, hey, so how did this go? How did that go? And she's like, well, they looked into it, but they didn't find anything. And I'm like, okay, we'll cross that off. I was like, what about this? And it basically would always come to, they found nothing. And I'm like, okay, well, what about media? Did he get out on like the news, any of that? She's like, no. And I'm like, well, why? And she's like, I don't know. And I was like, oh my gosh, why?
Yeah.
And then supposedly someone put missing person paper flyers up. And I was like, that's weird. And then she's like, oh, well, they took them all down the next day. And I'm like, why? And then I asked other people, and they're like, no one ever put missing person flyers up around town. And I was like, oh. So just there's a lot of it's just weird circumstances in gray areas.
When I'll ask you this once again, being that the circumstances are unclear, where, as best as you can tell, how did this story get started? Well, he and a friend were walking somewhere, and the friend just came back. Any idea how that became this story?
I don't know, because the only stories that I've ever, the most reoccurring ones that I heard, or the only one really, was the Chris leaving town in Brian's truck out of town. So I'm wondering if 2 stories of Chris walking out of town and then him in the truck with Brian going out of town somehow became one.
And Brian, I guess, passed the polygraph test regarding that story. Do you know if Brian owned up to that story, or he said that didn't happen?
I don't know. I don't know any of that.
Okay.
I've never even seen papers saying that he actually did do any of it.
Okay. Because, just so you know, the Charley Project, Chris's page, as far as the details of the disappearance, has to be one of the shortest ones there. It's a paragraph of 3 sentences. And like I said, that's about as short as Megan does it over there. Because here's what it says. McNeil was last seen in Hayfork, California on May 23rd of 2009.
That's the story that my brother Mike said. And it's not even true.
Okay, so that's on there, and I can send her a message. And the next sentence says, he was walking down Highway 3 with a friend toward Weaverille, California. He has never been heard from again. Few details are available in his case. That's a complete understatement.
The only thing that I can think of is that's all from Mike.
Okay.
That's the only thing I can think of, because those are the only, and that's when Trudy took over, because I'm the one that started his missing persons page on Facebook. Yeah. I'm the one that started that. And then when I got Trudy involved, she took it over, and then when she started doing, because like I can still see all of the messages and stuff, because I'm the main admin.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing she got the story from Mike, and that's how everything got changed, because that's not what was originally said on his page.
Okay.
It was everything that I know.
Okay. All right. So just it seems like a little, and listeners should know, I did speak to your brother, correct?
Yes.
And, I got along with him very well. I have no complaints about him at all, but certainly what he told me, and then when I spoke to you second, certainly some differences.
Yes.
Regarding
and our mom,
facts and things.
I talked to our mom, and then he talked to our mom, and then mom's like, Mike, you're wrong. And he's like, oh.
Okay.
So.
Okay. All right. Being that you just mentioned it regarding the Facebook page, why don't you give that out right now to everybody? What is the name of it? Of course, if you have an Instagram or TikTok or whatever else, you can name that stuff too.
Hold on a second. It's Help Find Christopher Joseph McNeil on Facebook.
Help Find Christopher Joseph McNeil, and that is for Facebook. Correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And I don't have an Instagram for it.
All right. And you are an admin there, so if any messages get sent there, you will see them.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Elizabeth, any final words before we complete this interview?
If you have any facts or leads, anything will help, and I will gladly listen.
Very good. And of course, you should know, Elizabeth, sometimes it happens. People contact me instead. My policy is anything that I ever get any tips or anything, I just send them right to the guests themselves, and then the guests can figure out what they want to do. I would not get something and go directly to the police. I would never do that. If I get any information, I go to the guest, I'll forward an email or whatever else. If they want to talk about it, we can do that off the record, but ultimately it's always the guest's decision what the guest wants to do with a piece of information. Of course, I'll just give the best input that I have. So,
okay.
But Elizabeth, thank you for joining me and all of the listeners on this episode of Unfound.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And that was my September 10th, 2024 interview with Elizabeth, sister of Christopher McNeil. I thank her for joining me and all of you on this episode. When we look at a disappearance like Christopher's, what we must first try to determine is there so little information because that's the way the missing person wanted it? Meaning the person slipped away trying to leave as little of a trail as possible. Or is it because somebody or a group has labored to keep the information hidden regarding the disappearance? Of course, this person or group could be suspects themselves. Or is there a lack of information just because that's the way it worked out? It wasn't part of some plan by anyone. Which choice do you like the most for Christopher's disappearance? Yet, we have another problem, and I think this is the bigger one. As you heard from Elizabeth, even the story that has been on the public record for the last 15 years is not correct at all. Yes, Christopher might have been walking somewhere, but he wasn't walking with anyone else, and he surely was not trying to walk to Weaverille. The reason this is a bigger problem is because the powers that be in law enforcement in Northern California still seem to think this is actually what happened, despite Elizabeth telling them otherwise. This is an excellent example of how hard-headed police can be with this kind of thing. This is like when Las Vegas Metro closed the case on Chris Turner, even though it was obvious to everyone that he was still missing. Once again, though, for us as the public, as people who take interests in disappearances, we must try to figure out how this misrepresentation of what happened occurred. Was it planned by someone? Did someone feed this story to police to throw everyone off? Or did the story come up due to a combination of laziness, inexperience, and rumor? You'll have to determine that for yourself. What catches my ear the most about Chris's disappearance is that it doesn't have the usual items we find in such cases: drugs and or mental health issues and or depression. None of it. And that brings me to the comment Chris allegedly made to a friend about disappearing. People can only plan their own disappearances if their minds are clear. And I think Chris's was. Yep, false few facts, indeed. If you'd like to hear and read more of my in-depth analysis into the disappearance of Christopher McNeil, please go to patreon.com/Unfound Podcast, sign up, and partake in the Unfound blog. Until then, I leave the public theorizing up to you. And that's the program. Right now, while you are in your podcast platform, Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, wherever, give Unfound a 5-star review, a thumbs up, whatever that platform allows. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Densel, and you've just finished this episode of Unfound.